Alright guys, let's talk about some of the shop bills I've had with this airplane. It is a turbine airplane, so the bills can be kind of high on it. The thing is with turbine airplanes, and specifically this aircraft, it tends to not need things very often. So mostly what you're looking at with owning one of these are just the periodic inspections that come around that are triggered either by a number of hours that you've flown or a certain amount of time that's gone by. So some of the inspections you hear me talk about, a lot of them are hour count or years. So there's a 100, 200 hour inspection. So that has to be done every 100 hours and every 200 hours or annually. They both have to be done. So those are both hours and time dependent. And so I'll just talk about some of the invoices I've seen for this airplane. The very first one that I got when I was buying the airplane, we got a pre-buy done. That was at Intercontinental Jet in Tulsa, so that's actually the Mitsubishi service center. The first invoice I ever saw for this airplane, I about fainted because I hadn't purchased it yet, and this was sort of the pre-buy. But I'm going to read the number here off the invoice: $139,791.59. And yeah, my tongue about fell out of my head when I saw that. I started looking at it more closely though. The bulk of that was the fact that the airplane needed windshields, and I knew that from the moment I saw the airplane, I knew that it was going to need a set of windshields probably sooner than later. And those are big ticket items, so those are right around $40,000 a piece. I think I paid $40,300 a piece for those. So one of those has come in, the other one actually has not arrived. This initial invoice, about 80 or 90, probably $90,000 of that is both windshields and the labor to put those windshields in. So if you take that out, now you're down to a little bit more manageable number. That's about $50,000. The other thing that was expensive on that initial inspection that was done, one of the side windows had chemical damage, and these windows can be polished to remove scratches and damage down to a certain thickness. So there's a third-party company that'll come and measure those and tell you whether they can be polished and like what the extent of the damage is. So usually they can be polished. If you keep the airplane in a hangar, they last really indefinitely. What really makes these things age quicker than anything is being out in the sun all the time. So this airplane did live on the ramp with the previous owner. I think they owned it 2.5 years or so. And it lived on the ramp out in Reno, and so it had the sun beating down on it all the time. This window, however, was chemical damage. The side windows aren't quite as bad as the windshields. That was about $11,000 with labor. And so the remainder beyond the windshields, some of those items were airworthiness items that had to be fixed for the airplane to be considered airworthy and be signed off for the annual inspection and be able to continue to legally fly. And some of them are just kind of nice to have. It was things like seat recline mechanisms and that sort of thing. So not everything had to be done on here. The final bill for me, I paid $17,564.62. So those were some airworthiness items and some other minor things that I did want fixed during my ownership. So we didn't say yes to everything on there. The seller picked up all the airworthiness items, so the side window was the main one. That was $11,000. I think their total bill for that was $21,000 or $22,000. So they paid $21,000, $22,000. I paid $17,000 and some change. So the very first bill on this aircraft was about $40,000 out the door. The windshields, again, that's a huge ticket item, but the price of the airplane, I think, more than reflected the fact that it needed those windshields that are very expensive. So I did have to wire the money for those right about a year ago is when I wired the money for those. So I had to send, I think it was $80,500, $80,518, I think was the number, to the other service center that I bought those from. They put in the order, and they're actually made by a company called PPG, which is short for Pittsburgh Plate Glass. They make, I would say, probably most pressurized aircraft windshields, and they make a lot of other products, paint for cars, all sorts of things. So they're a big industrial conglomerate. There, I think, is a shortage of labor, of skilled labor going on with them. And so this is sort of a low volume airplane. So I think what they do is they wait till they get a book of orders on them, and then they set up the tooling and they make a run of orders. So the initial estimate for this, it was supposed to come in at the end of May, and then here we are, we're in almost the middle of October, and they still haven't come in. I guess one has come in. The other one they're telling me is going to come in at the end of November now. So thankfully, the existing windshields, they had a tiny bit of life left in them. So it's definitely getting to be time to change them, but they have remained airworthy long enough for me to get the new ones ordered, thankfully. So again, first invoice, $17,564.62 that came out of my pocket. The seller again paid about $22,000. I don't have their invoice in front of me, so I don't have an exact number on that. I did have to fix the squat switch. So I got in the airplane to do my final checkout flight at training and turned the battery switch on, and the stick shaker was going off. And so that's supposed to be inhibited on the ground, and the way the airplane knows it's on the ground is the squat switch. So that's a little electrical switch that's open or closed, and it's attached to the landing gear. So when there's weight on the landing gear, it electrically closes that switch, and that tells a lot of things on the airplane that are air ground dependent, hey, I'm on the ground. So the fact that the stall warning was going off means that the squat switch was malfunctioning. The part for that was $700. I paid about $550 in labor, so $1,250 or so. That was the first repair I had on the airplane. The next inspection that came up, it was a couple of months ago. It went in for the 100, 200 hour, 400 hour inspections. And they also cleaned the fuel nozzles. So they took the fuel nozzles out of the engines and they sent that off to, I forget, the service center in Wisconsin for Mitsubishi. And they cleaned those fuel nozzles, sent them back to the shop that I had work on the airplane. They billed them, and the shop then passed that expense along to me without markup. That bill for the 100, 200, 400, and some other miscellaneous items. There's some small parts on here, screws, washers, some relays got replaced. That's a pretty common thing on these airplanes, for the relays to fail. The continuity check on the coil, I think is what it is. The bill for that a couple months ago, $10,614.90. And I sort of made a mistake on this. The 600-hour inspection, I didn't realize it also had a calendar life on that. So it's 600 hours or 3 years. And I didn't realize that it was the 3 years part applied. So it was coming up due on the 600-hour. And unfortunately, the shop had not allocated enough time to do the 600-hour on top of all the other stuff, because it's a pretty involved inspection. So I had to reschedule that. They got that done a couple of weeks ago. And let's see if I have that invoice. So that invoice for the 600-hour, $12,548.95. It actually would have been quite a bit less than that, but the airplane did need a battery. So it has 2 batteries on the airplane. They're 24-volt batteries. I use Concord brand ones. Gills are the other brands. That's an option. I've been told the Concords tend to live longer in these airplanes. The battery alone, with a little bit of labor to install it, was $4,200. So if you back that out, I probably would have been looking at just over $8,000 to get this 600-hour inspection. The 600-hour, they take the flap drives off. So there's these big jack screws that have a big square nut. It's made of, looks like brass, sort of. So the nut is attached to the flap. When the jack screws turn, it pushes on the nuts, which pushes the flaps out to extend the flaps. They take all that apart and they measure the threads on both the jack screw and the drive nuts for wear. So those do have a wear limit, and you're talking thousandths. It's not like probably a visible amount of wear just looking at it with your eyes. But once those are worn past limits, those would have to be replaced. Thankfully, mine passed. I do think they said if it needed all 4 jack screws and all 4 nuts, that's probably $80,000 worth of parts. So that can be kind of intimidating, but if you keep them greased and everything, again, they should last a long time. So it's sort of like the windshield. It's a lot of money, but it probably only needs it every 20 years or maybe longer than that if you really take care of it. So let's see, other bills that have come up. The qualification course was $7,500. The recurrent is about half that. I think it was $3,700. So that's for the training that you need to safely operate this airplane and legally operate this airplane. The insurance the first year was kind of high for a guy with my kind of flight time. I have, you know, probably around 15,000 total hours of flight time and lots of turbine time, PIC time. I have turboprop time and Garrett engine airplanes. With all that, the insurance premium for the first year, $19,211. So, yeah, I know that's pretty extreme, and I thought that was probably a little beyond the pale. It was better this year. It was $14,300 this year. So with some time in the airplane, I think I had right around 100 hours in the airplane when I went to renew it. So the renewal was quite a bit better. 14,000 some change. That's I believe $1 million of liability. I'm not sure off the top of my head, but and the whole value reflects the value of one of these. So it is expensive for the coverage that you're getting, but you do have to think this thing goes 300 miles an hour and you can put, you know, 8 people in it. So there is some substantial amount of liability exposure there. So that's getting to the point where I decided I could live with that. So those are the big expenses I've had. And I've said in some of the other videos that, yeah, this is a lot of airplane for what you have to pay for it. And I still think that's true. So, you know, some of these numbers I've thrown out, you might say, hey, Captain Al, how can you say that this is a cheap airplane to operate? And I didn't actually ever say that it was a cheap airplane to operate. What I did say was it's cheap for what it is. So if you compared these bills to what you would see on most jets, this is actually quite a bit more reasonable than what you'd see on most jets, I think. I think most jets you could multiply all these numbers by 3 or 4, and that's talking about the low end of the jet market. So again, I do think this airplane is a tremendous value. You do have to obviously make a pretty good living to be able to write these kind of checks, so this is not a poor man's airplane by any stretch. But again, I do think it is an excellent value for the speed and the load carrying capability. So again, not a cheap airplane, but it's cheap for what it is, and I stand by that. So those are some of the numbers involved. Give me a like, share, subscribe if you like what you saw.